Okay, this is just a response, a follow-up, and perhaps uh, maybe hyperbole, but it appears this could be one of the largest coincidences ever in all time. Uh, Often I'm asked, where do you get your numbers? Speaking of the disparity between 4.5 billion years, this dispute out there, billion years of the Earth's age, and that's asserted by Christians, Baptists that I'm familiar with. Uh, for as far back as I can read in their research and their studies and their assertions, accepted an interval of time between Genesis 1:1 and verse 2. It didn't really become a controversy until that interval needed to be done away in light of a young Earth assertion. So young Earth is approximately 6,250 years, and yet notice between these numbers is a ratio, and of course, knowing 12 hours in the day and 12 hours nighttime, as Jesus said, there's 12 hours in the day. So I just doubled this to 12,500, just using the Bible numbers. And then, as Dr. John Penn said, there's a relationship here, and he reminded me that time only exists and can only be expressed in a ratio, like speed, so many miles per hour, and things like that. So he said a 360-day prophetic year, so 360 days. And the only ratio that I was aware of in the Bible was the one he showed me in Psalm 90, which was 1 day. And so here's 1 day as 1,000 years. 1,000 years. So there's days. So then I just plugged in 1,000 years, like he said we could do, and already obvious to anyone that's researched this, to those of you that have been interested in this, because time isn't linear, it's not constant. So if we take 12,500 years times 360 days, it gives us 4.5 million days. And then when you multiply that by this 1,000 years, it equals 4.5 billion years. So it's the greatest coincidence in history, but my interest was why we can't see things like this, and that's because when we're caught up in proof texting or advocating one side against the other, this is why, let's say you are a young earth person, meaning you believe that somehow the Bible is telling you through a normal reading that the earth is only thousands of years old. That doesn't have anything to do with how much time could transpire. And the interval of time between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2, if we reverse this to 1,000 years or as a day, then if the sin of Satan and the judgment that followed occurred in between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2, then we would see a velocity of 1,000 years per day transpiring, which would only, if you really want to see something very fascinating, which any scientist of any education could have this conversation with you, but at 1,000 years per day velocity between not Genesis 1:1 and 1:2, but from the time of Satan's sin, which fell between this, if that's the actual occurrence there that brought the earth into a formless and empty state, then from the time of Satan's sin, whatever that was, from the time the first earth was made perfect and without flaw and done instantly as the Bible teaches, well then at 1,000 years per day velocity of speed, a rate of destruction, if you will, that would have only taken 12,500 years to transpire in our understanding of time. And then since Adam, that is the recreation, that is the repair, more correctly, Genesis started in Genesis 1:3, until we have Adam created in Genesis 1:26, then we've only had 6,000 years since then. So all of this, 4.5 billion years could have transpired. 4.5 billion years could have transpired. 4.5 billion years could have transpired past here. And Bullinger, in his book, before 1916, he was working on trying to reconcile the age of the earth with the Bible and said there was plenty of room between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2. But if we notice carefully, 4.5 billion years transpire at that rate of speed, that velocity, very destructive, which explains all the damage and death and debris in the universe, especially as it falls through our atmosphere. Explains why the Earth is the only living planet with life on it. It was repaired and made into a habitat for humanity, literally. Well, if you add 12,500 to 6,000, all this has taken place within a framework of 18,500 years. So we would have our answer here. So 12,500 times 360 days equals 4.5 million days. And then when you multiply that by 1,000 years, that equals 4.5 billion years. So if we place that time, because man could not live in a time of 1,000 years per day velocity, but according to what science says and is observed about a Big Bang, it looks like it happened not when God created the heavens and the earth, but rather after Satan sinned and the destructive force. And we can even, from the Bible, provide our own rationale for how quickly and how destructive that could have been, and certainly appreciate it. But this is probably the largest coincidence of which I'm aware in history, and it took a retired hermeneutic professor who, well, he was very patient with his research assistants, Eddie Johnson and myself, but just using the numbers in the Bible, he was very much more interested in what can the Bible tell us if we took our approximate 6,000 year that we see history of man to be, and then if that were not including 12-hour night, and that's where this number came from, originated. This is a 360-day prophetic year in the Bible. The one day is 1,000 years is where this 1,000 years arrived. So just leaving it in the form in which it appears in the Bible, then this number is producible from the Bible itself, independent of any technology or any scientific references. And then you can certainly see that moving that into that interval to explain the amount of time and also the velocity, showing how destructive that would have been and necessitating the repair of the earth, and then noticing it's only 6,000 years since Adam was placed on the planet, then we have all of this took place within 18,500 years. So if you've read the Bible and come away thinking, it just doesn't seem like that long ago God did what he did, you would have a rationale for that. And if you think, well, research and feedback and observations are saying much more time has been involved, that is all capable of being ascertained from the Bible itself. So a person doing this arithmetic here would come up with this 4.5 million, and then multiplying it by 1,000 years would come up with this, independent of some type of scientific, technologically based evaluation of time estimation. So just a coincidence, very large, looming coincidence, probably the largest coincidence in the world. But how many people do you know noticed a ratio between 12,500 or these early years between 6,000 and 20,000 that's debated, and the 4.5 billion? What I'm well aware of now is in my research is that this is not atypical. This is very typical. When someone asserts one thing, we become blind to the other. Our bias causes us to avoid this source of information. Or if we accept this, we are then blinded to that, when it may not be the case that they're contradictory. And that was it. Just wanted to make a brief video about the most ultimate coincidence, complicated coincidence of all time. And just share that with the rest of you if you ever want to know what all the banter's about. It's usually because it shuts down our willingness to think and collaborate. And yet, especially among the Baptists, and I really love the Baptists that practice hermeneutics, that use Bible languages, take a systemic approach to their theology, because in that kind of approach, you'll find an environment that encourages collaborative reasoning and through collective learning. And that's a great process when brethren associate and function to learn, and as iron sharpens iron, we actually hone our skill, our craft of interpreting the Bible, teaching the Bible, and then demonstrating the veracity of it. Because what's the big deal about the Bible being true, except the bigger deal that the Bible makes than even sometimes our arguments. This is always encouraging to me to find that the Bible is larger and much more advanced in its expression of thought than those of us who argue about the Bible necessarily. So you have a blessed day and enjoy this.